The following compilation features unsettling and spine-chilling tales sourced from Reddit's horror communities. Reader discretion is strongly advised. These narratives may contain graphic descriptions, psychological distress, and themes that could unsettle sensitive individuals. Proceed with caution, as immersion into these eerie stories may provoke fear, unease, and sleep disturbances. Enter this realm of Reddit's creepy horror stories at your own risk, as the line between reality and the macabre may blur within these chilling narratives. I still remember the first time she came in. I was tired. It had been a long shift. I'd chosen to start serving at this particular establishment because it had a reputation of being slow. Had is the operative word here. At one point in time, I could assemble a drink and have a man, maybe late 50s, early 60s, sit at the bar and look down wistfully, spouting off his regrets about a wasted life. I would get to listen. It was background noise, therapeutic, honest background noise in a world full of characters and bullshit. But lo and behold, this particular haunt I picked started becoming all the rage for young people. Blech, who needs them, right? All full of life, vigor and energy, smiles and excitement about the future, wanting to party, wanting to flirt, wearing layer upon layer of forced personas. "Hey, Chief," says the guy, curling two fingers while dressed up in clothes Daddy bought. "We, want a round for this whole group? Yeah?" he says, forcing his voice down 2 octaves while doing his best imitation of an alpha male, just off a bender of binge-watching hours of charisma on command videos. I'd want to say, but wouldn't. And of course the people surrounding this man, all wearing masks of their own. Fake cheers, fake gratitude, and pretty girls penny-pinching through college, more than happy to get a free drink off this schmuck before getting the fuck out of Dodge. And God, I was sick of it. But, as is the case with life, the places I did want to be were out of range, unattainable. The dive bars filled with the seedy, miserable, philosophical crowd I craved were just too far away from the shitty apartment I lived in to justify working at. An honest environment would have cost me too much in gas prices. Unfortunately, enough that my non-existent paycheck would have gone towards breaking even at absolute best. She came in while I was making a rum and coke for someone, a double. I wasn't one to project favorable feelings onto a stranger. I was thrown to find, as I saw her enter the bar, that I didn't immediately hate her. She looked like an absolute stranger to the establishment, yet I got no sense that she saw herself as above it. It felt like she was a human being, someone who needed to be here for some reason, but was unequipped for it, like she felt silly, like she found the music to be too loud, too overwhelming. I watched her take awkward steps through the chaos of the floor, ever so slowly weaving past people unable to move because they lacked spatial awareness, and because she couldn't muster up the words, "excuse me," for some reason. She was too kind, too polite. And then, she was right in front of me. She looked up instinctively, as if expecting a menu, and then down at the counter, as if expecting a QR code. And then she just sort of shuffled closer, with an energy like she was afraid of interrupting something even though I was looking right at her, doing literally nothing else, fully prepared to take her order. "So I don't drink." "You don't drink," I repeated back, deadpan. "Not really. I'm bad with knowing what to get." "Well, let's keep it simple, I guess. Did you want a beer? More partial to a cocktail, maybe?" "Ooh, cocktail. I love cocktails." "So you do drink?" "I drink, but not in a fancy or informed way. Usually I just get what the other person's drinking, but the other person isn't here yet, so I guess I'll get whatever tastes the most like juice." I failed to suppress a laugh. Hearing those words from a fully grown adult was something else. "Oh, I'm sorry," she said. "Are you going to look down on me for not being all bougie about my drinks?" I guess what I meant to say was, I want something hoppy, aged 24 years, from Ireland, with a bit of a kick, maybe a sour. You are melding so many unrelated things together right now, it is crazy. Actually, I'm just a trailblazer and completely ahead of my time. And then, a look in her eyes as if she was beaming the words, "Yes, I'm aware I'm a dork," right at me. And I am absolutely, positively not an uninformed loser. I finished making her a pina colada and handed it to her. "I hope you enjoy your drink, ma'am." A sweet, appreciative curl of her lips as she tapped her card, then turned to leave. She was back to the hurricane of people swirling across the room. I watched her body take on an awkward pantomime performance of, how the fuck do I find a table through this sea of mayhem? My eyes stayed with her for longer than I'd like to admit. And then I realized I was smiling. And it wasn't as a courtesy or a lie or a way to make someone think I was listening while I was off in maladaptive daydream land. She sat at an elevated rustic corner table by an antique mirror, the one closest to the bathrooms. A table that could seat a lot of people, but only had her. The other person joined her eventually. I caught them talking at odd intervals as I fell back into my miserable shift at my miserable job, fielding the same two repetitive questions from doe-eyed 20-year-olds. What's it like being a bartender? And did you always want to get into this line of work? No, I wanted to say to both questions. My eyes would continually drift over to that corner table as the hours ticked away. I felt a pang of jealousy as I saw her hold the hand of the man seated across from her. A man who looked like he was having a rough go of it, wistful at times, borderline miserable at others, and occasionally tinged with nostalgia. He was all emotion, and she was consoling him, it seemed, hearing his heart's story. We closed in on midnight, and the two of them were still there. She wasn't saying much of anything, but he was certainly saying all of everything by the looks of it. Her eyes remained steadfast on him, nodding as she took in his every word. It was early in my late shift. Tuesday night. Things were slow, but not too slow. It was ideal. Quiet. I could focus on the white noise of murmured, tired conversations, the clinking of glasses. It was like a meditation tape, my equivalent of the soothing sounds of the ocean. I had time to make my drinks with love. Not so much love, but focus. That's the word. A man arrived at the counter. He looked familiar. It took a second for me to place him. The gentleman from the other night. The one who sat across from the bashful woman who caught my eye. The one that got to hold her hand. He, on that particular night anyways, was a basket of complex emotions. Now, however, there was a certain calmness to him, a groundedness. He looked peaceful, like his head was finally above water. "Hey, what can I fix you up with?" "You have my permission to surprise me," he said humbly. I snickered. If this was her boyfriend or husband, he certainly had an interesting rhythm to his moods. I grabbed a glass and a muddler and started preparing an old-fashioned for him. As I did, in betrayal to my usual approach to customer service, I asked him a non-logistical question. "And how's your day?" He took a genuine beat to collect his thoughts, eyes raised diagonally at the ceiling, a thoughtful twist at the right corner of his mouth, and a contemplative, repetitive nod as if the words were playing in his head like a metronome. Then, "You ever just feel grateful?" he said. "Grateful that everything's finally come together. It all makes sense now, and it's all gonna be all right." Ha! Cannot say I know the feeling, but envious for sure. Guess I'm quite the lucky man. "Oh, you are." Based on his reaction, I don't think the reference landed for him. It seemed like he had a wonderful woman in his life, hence, lucky. He instead seemed to take the message in a much more vague, almost cosmic way. "I do have to tell you, though, quite sincerely, that it ain't all luck." He shot me a knowing look. "You gotta really put yourself out there. You have to be open, emotionally naked. Those are the things it takes to find your home, your people. Don't think I'll be there anytime soon, good sir." I gave him the drink, and he made his way back to that same corner table. For the few remaining times that night that he accidentally slipped into my eye line as I was loitering on the clock, he was the perfect picture of contentment. Another busy night in my self-inflicted holding pattern of a career. Some people say that bartenders are modern-day philosophers. Those people are stupid. It's a customer service gig like any other. Only difference here is you give people alcohol to leave you alone, but it never, ever works. This night was particularly stressful. We were down a person. I hated when we were down a person. When we were down a person, my boss would yell, and then I would wonder why the fuck I didn't just finish college. And so the domino effect of self-loathing would go. There were too many people asking for too many drinks. I almost didn't even notice she was there. She'd brought a new person this time, arms linked, girlfriends out for an evening. She approached the bar yet again, sheepish as before. Interestingly, the girl she was with seemed like her polar opposite. She looked decisive. Focused, fake a paper tiger, that was my assessment. "Hey," said the one I was more sympathetic to, with a couple of verbal stumbles after the "hey." "Wait, shoot, did I never actually get your name the last time we talked?" "Brian," I said. "Which means I never gave you my name either." "Nope," I said, cutting off what felt like it was going to be a self-effacing apology. She extended her hand. "I'm Monica, and I'm sorry. I'm usually better about that. That meaning, polite enough to ask someone's name." I returned her greeting. She gave me one of the firmest handshakes I'd ever received. "Okay, so we know each other's names now, which is good." "This," she said, motioning to the friend beside her, "is Sabrina. And Sabrina," she gestured back to me, "this is Brian. Okay, great, good. Now that we're all friends, Brian, I'd love it if you could make the same drink you made last time, if you, remember what it was." "You mean the one where you asked me to make you juice?" The barb only brought a cheeky laugh from her. "Yes, the very same." I watched them from behind the counter later. They were at that same, distant table. Of course they were. I wanted to judge them. I really, really did. The shift had been a headache, and fancying myself as better than the unwashed masses was exactly what the doctor was ordering. I wanted so badly to assume that Sabrina was the shallow friend to Monica, a person who actually seemed somewhat kind, somewhat genuine. But as Monica held Sabrina's hand over the table, looking at her as if she was the only person that existed in our wretched cosmos, and Sabrina in turn spoke openly as she cycled through ugly laughs, ugly crying, ugly reminiscing, emotional whiplash that I couldn't quite keep up with. All I saw was a person shedding any semblance of a front, peeling off layers of emotional makeup, becoming completely raw to the person they were in front of, laying it all out there, frankly, for Monica to receive with quiet nods and gentle affirmations. Their conversation went on for hours. Their drinks, the pina coladas I made, were still in front of them, chipped away at, with only the lightest of sips over the course of their conversation. Glasses, half full or half empty, I guess, depending on how you look at things. 3 weeks passed before I saw Monica again. The thought of her would cross my mind every now and then, the strange want to actually talk to her. With how much my life was dimmed by forced, transactional conversations, it was a foreign feeling. Finally, on a night where I arrived late for work, I saw her. Seated in the corner, a barely touched drink in front of her, hand gently resting on the man beside her as he poured his heart out to her. Completely different guy from the last guy. And at this point, I was convinced, as I watched the man emote as if he'd just come from a Brené Brown TED Talk, that she was some sort of modern, New Age therapist. 55-minute sessions? Pfft, what about 3 to 5 hours at a bar? That's really help us curb your existential dread. Her imaginary words, not mine. I caught some conflicting feelings in myself as I looked on. Despite how awkward she could be, there was some sort of bizarre charisma or allure there, the charisma of someone being completely themselves. It made me nervous, though it was hard to put a finger on why. Nevertheless, the hours passed. Work was work, and as I finished exhausting my reservoirs of nods and smiles in exchange for compliments, platitudes, and the occasional openly rude customer, my eyes flitted over to her table. To Monica saying goodbye to her new client, or friend, or lover, whoever he was. A long hug. Then, a very deep glance into the stranger's eyes. An intense glance, a loving glance. And then they parted. So maybe scratch therapist? Or alternatively, a very, very new age therapist? Curse you, pangs of jealousy. I'm 35 now. I should be beyond feelings at this point. She approached the bar. "Hey," I said. "Brian," she said, leaning her elbow onto the bar with an animated, almost full-body exhale. "How are you? Would it be uncool of me to say I'm tired?" "Why would that be uncool?" "Because you're a bartender, so I'm tired probably describes your entire evening." "Oh, well, I mean, if I were off the clock, then I'd say absolutely you're being uncool, you jerk. But since I'm working, no, not at all. Do you have any traumatic stories you wanted to share? War memories? Tales about the one that got away?" "War stories for days," she said with a soft chuckle, then an even softer no, and then a more serious hey. "Hi," I said again. "You're probably wondering what I'm doing at the corner of the bar, right?" "Yes, I am actually. I'm helping people. Are you a therapist?" She smiled. "I suppose that's one way to look at it. I think I'm a bit confused." She picked her words carefully. "I find people who are like me, people who maybe feel like they don't belong, outsiders, folks who are tired of pretending that they're okay living in an uncaring world, and I connect with them, and I build friendships with them, meaningful connections." "How do you know that someone's an outsider?" A pause, and then, "It's all in the eyes." She told me that I was welcome to sit with her on one of my days off. We could go to another pub if I didn't want to spend my off hours where I worked. Strange as the proposition was, I went for it. At this point, I'd sussed her out as being a truthful, open and vulnerable person. Someone who seemed, at times, confused about it all. Confused in an endearing way. A way that felt different, special. A way that made me want to know more. On a night we both agreed upon, I met her at a different joint on the other side of town. I sat across from her, curiously skeptical about how all of this would go. And then hours passed, and within them I opened up, truly. It's sort of hard not to spill it all when someone gives you their absolutely undivided attention. With perfect eye contact and affirmations pulled out of the book of Mr. Rogers, she sat there, statuesque. As I whittled off details about my childhood, my confusion about life, feelings of aimlessness, shame at how fucking judgmental I could be, and everything more, all of my misplaced anger, my vitriol. There were no real horror stories in my past, it turns out, nor any major present-day ailments that were bringing me misery. Putting up walls and scrutinizing strangers were just my coping mechanisms for being over-socialized and in my head about it all. At the end of the night, she gave me that same look of endearment she gave to the other man, as a sort of peace, a camaraderie, came over me. "You're all right," she said, hand gently cradling my cheek. "It's the world that's stealing your joy from you." It seemed as if the words held more weight for her than they did me, but I nonetheless obliged, with a sort of silent agreement, an internal nod. I felt warm about it all. She gave me the tightest hug imaginable before leaving, and whispered in my ear as she did, "I know a way things can be better. If you're interested, find me again." I hadn't seen her at the bar for quite some time, and I have to admit, it made me antsy. It was hard to have someone Mary Poppins waltz their way into your life, be utterly emotionally naked with no reservations, allow you to do the same, and then disappear right after teasing some cosmic secret about the answer to all of life's problems. During this period of lack, I found myself softening in my role as liquid therapist a bit. People's idiosyncrasies, their faking-it personas, their buried miseries, posturing, need to party, flirt, fight, mentions of beta, sigma, alpha, omega, ability to lie to themselves. desire to run away from themselves, from everything actually. I understood it. I sympathized with it. We're all just trying. I mean, I was still a judgmental POS 85% of the time, but hey, that remaining 15%, we can call that an improvement. I was at the tail end of the kind of slow shift that made you curse yourself forever hating the busy ones. I closed up shop and there she was, in the doorway, as I was leaving. I didn't have it in me to pretend I wasn't enthused to see her. Instead, I ran up to her and hugged her. "I missed you," I said, with the delivery of a nerd at prom. "I hope you've been well," she said, returning the embrace. It felt nice. "You said that things could be better. I want to know how," I said. She smiled, her lips and eyes lighting up. "Of course, let me show you. Do you want to come over?" It's funny. There's a certain connotation that comes with being invited to a sort of stranger's place at closing time. Yet, I was absolutely sure Monica's head and intentions were in a completely different space from the rest of the waking and drinking world. We sat on her sofa together. She gave me a tender look. "I made something to help explain everything you're feeling. I hope it'll be helpful." I exhaled slowly, then nodded. She got up and popped a shabby, plain white DVD, marked with Sharpie scribbles, into the player. She returned to the couch as the video started on her TV. Over a black screen, an odd, disquieting melody played that I believe was intended to be comforting, soft synthesizers and strange notes. Then a narration. We are not our bodies. Instinctively, we all know this. It was Monica's voice, speaking over footage of the cosmos, galaxies and stars. We look closely at this world, as the delicate, sensitive souls that we are, and we can tell we don't belong here. Footage from Earth, empty woods, empty parks, empty cities. Our three-dimensional forms holding our souls down. And then, a slideshow of images that resembled pages from a high school biology textbook. A diagram of the human body, with a line pointing to the chest saying, "Soul." Lines coming from the arms, the head, the legs, eyes, ears, all labeled as "not soul." And if we stay here long enough, our soul will wither away and die. Another textbook-style diagram, but of a decomposing body this time, even if we appear healthy. Footage of the ocean now. It looked like an amateur video, taken by someone actually wading in the middle of the sea. We don't know who brought us here or why, and we don't need to know. The camera panned up from the water and angled sharply to the night sky, facing the glowing moon. We just need to go home now. And then a new image. Over the backdrop of a sea of stars, a pitch-black door on the left side of the screen. On the right, the same high school textbook diagram of the human body, standing upright this time. An arrow pointing to the door. Her narration was gone now. Text appeared on screen. Step 1, decide to exit. Step 2, find like-minded friends. Step 3, pick the method that brings you the greatest sense of internal comfort. Step 4, exit stage left. Step 5, when you're done, don't go into the light. And then her voice returned. "Let's go together now." She held my hand tightly as the video concluded. I felt disturbed. I felt unsafe. I tore my gaze from the TV and turned to her. Her eyes were serene, peaceful, calm, welcoming. "It's okay now, Brian. You're okay. I'm here with you now." "Monica, what exactly did you mean with that video?" I detached my hand from hers and rose from the sofa. She stood up as well. "You know what it means. You know it every time you look out aimlessly from behind the counter." I backed away. "I'm going to need you to say it explicitly." She traced my steps. "We're departing tomorrow. We'll be leaving from the bar. You're welcome to join us at the table." I reached the door. "I have to go," I said, reaching behind me to feel for the doorknob. One last good look at her. She wasn't perturbed, sad, offended, confused, or anything. Softly, she said, "I'll be seeing you, Brian." I turned and left. I worked the evening shift the next day. I was dead in the eyes, exhausted, not judging a soul, just breathing, just relishing the intake of stale bar air. When she arrived, she went straight to the corner table. Slowly, others poured in. Some of them I recognized as patrons who had shown up at the bar before, folks I was unaware were ever associated with Monica. They Saturday with her, eyes trained on her. Soon after, her girlfriend from before, Sabrina, pulled up a seat as well. The two other men I'd seen her with on different nights took their spots too. New faces appeared next, ones unfamiliar to me. By the end, there were 12 at the table. From my distant vantage point, their conservations seemed muted, soft, hopeful, but with a discordant dash of somberness. It was hard to focus on my job, to focus on the customers coming up to me. I'd look over to the corner to catch more gentle speaking, the sharing of thoughts, sentiments, words that looked as though they were coming out as whispers. I wanted to be a fly on the wall. I also wanted to be as far away as humanly possible. Was there something I could say here? Something that a good Samaritan was supposed to be doing right now? Over the following 45 minutes, give or take, their words stopped. They closed their eyes together in a lengthy, silent moment. It didn't quite seem like a meditation or a prayer. I'm not sure what it was. Eventually, they all opened their eyes around the same time. And then they turned in unison and looked at me with wide smiles. Their eyes were filled with what seemed like a very disturbing form of love, an image pressed to my memory forever. Monica alone got up and walked through the crowd, purposeful this time. Once again, she was in front of me on the other side of the counter. "You can still join us," she said. "Where are you going?" I asked. "You wouldn't believe this, because it's going to sound really silly, but there's actually a special spot in the middle of the ocean, one that leads all the way up to the stars." She gave me a knowing smile. "We thought it might be a good idea to check it out together," she said. She held her hand out for me. "If you want to come." I wasn't sure what it was. Loyalty, a sense of camaraderie, a fear of letting her down. But as much as I was repulsed and terrified by her, I still had to fight the urge to give her my hand. Eventually, she gleaned my decision through my inaction and retracted her invite. "Thank you for talking to me and spending so much meaningful time with me, Brian." She returned to the table. The others rose. They left behind anything they'd brought with them. Then, all 12 of them linked arms like they were about to go on a pub crawl together and left. Their bodies were found in the ocean a week later. Each of them had worn a weighted metal belt to help them sink. The cops told me that half of the corpses were found in close proximity to each other. The other half were scattered about. I had to assume that the group found clustered together were the ones successfully able to keep their arms linked the entire time. I had the chance to see the photos of the deceased during the identification process. I did my best to provide the authorities with details on the faces I recognized, times I'd seen them at the bar, rare occasions where I'd spoken with them. My tiny, insignificant crumbs of information were thankfully counterbalanced by insights provided by some of the regulars who'd known them better. It didn't take long to piece together the identities of the recently departed. Not just who they were, but their full histories, careers, families, friends, aspirations, anecdotes, blanks filled in, all except for Monica. As it turns out, if she did have a history, it certainly wasn't one with much depth. She had no known family, no friends, aside from the ones she left with on her final night, of course. No information on when she'd actually moved to the area or where she'd come from. I was the only one who seemed to know anything about her. As if that wasn't uncomfortable enough of a revelation, the cops decided to keep the hits coming. They must have been in an oversharing mood. They let me know that this recent death event wasn't quite as unique as I might have imagined. In fact, instances of groups walking into the water together, weights worn, arms linked, had been documented as a recurring phenomena over the last half-century or so in our quiet town. The folk tales and horror stories about events like this had, of course, existed for far longer in our little slice of the country. The sorts of folk tales I could have imagined a man, maybe late 50s, early 60s, sharing with me on a night where I was tuning him out as comforting background noise while making a drink. I took one last good look at Monica's photo before I wrapped up with the authorities. Out of all of the images, hers was the one that looked the most tranquil, the most at peace. I'll be seeing you, Brian. Months had passed. The incident had left me with a sinking but mostly ignorable feeling. Routine had thankfully proven to be a formidable distraction. I was behind the counter, same as always, in a moment of time where I was unoccupied. No immediate task in front of me, nor some lingering item of work that I'd forgotten to do. I looked out at the bar scene. Not a miserable look this time, nor an aimless one either. Just a look. Out amongst the crowd of youngsters, characters and fakes, not mutually exclusive titles, mind you, nor titles I used in a derogatory fashion anymore. I saw someone enter the bar, a new face, unfamiliar. One that had a distinct sort of energy to them. They weren't an imposter like all the others. They looked like they felt silly, like they didn't belong here, but didn't see themselves as above it all. In the past, I would have found this person to almost be charming. Now, they were just a person. They took awkward steps through the bar floor. They were over-polite, and then they were right in front of me. "A pina colada, please," she said. I suppressed my laugh. Her eyes lit up with a glint of confusion. "What?" she asked playfully. "Nah, it's just a little uncanny. Kind of a throwback there. You, reminded of me someone just now. But that's anyways. Pina colada. Coming right up." I went to work. When I heard her response, all I could do was continue making her drink, operating off of muscle memory alone. "I have to admit, I'm a bit disappointed you didn't join us last time, Brian." I mechanically continued the process of blending the drink. "Don't remember telling you my name." "I hope you understand that there's still a lot I need to do here," she said. "Like-minded friends to find, meaningful connections to make. Departures to schedule," she said. My throat caught. The ritual of making a drink for a customer was the only bit of normalcy I had left in this exchange. I tried to cling to it. I tried to drag it out as long as possible, but I had to speak. "Monica," I finally said, more breath than voice. But when I studied her features, she didn't resemble Monica at all, and I can only assume she knew as much. "You can call me Elizabeth this time," she said, "and don't worry, I never ever want to rush you." And then that same knowing, disarming look. "You can join me when you're ready." I struggled to put the finishing touches on the cocktail when I heard my boss's voice. "Brian, what are you doing?" I turned to look at him, confused. "What? What are you doing?" he repeated. "Making a drin." I looked ahead, and there was no one at the bar. "A drink," I finished. "For yourself." I thought about it. "I guess, yeah." He gave me a concerned look, the kind of look that asks you to say more and share what might be going on. But I changed the subject. It was probably best to keep things surface level from now on. No need to go deep. My name is Jake, and I've spent most of my life navigating the mountains and forests of the Pacific Northwest. I guess you could say I'm a tracker by trade. People come to me when someone goes missing in the wilderness because they know I've got a knack for finding folks, even when others give up. I don't talk much about the things I've seen out there. Most of it's not worth repeating, and some of it no one would believe anyway. Before I became the go-to tracker for missing persons, I spent several years in the military. I served in the Special Forces, where I was trained in reconnaissance, survival, and tracking. The skills I honed there have been invaluable in my work since leaving the service, but they also come with their own set of memories, some I'd rather forget. One mission stands out, a training exercise that took place in the dense jungles of Central America. We were tasked with locating a high-value target who was supposed to be hiding in a designated area. Our team had to track him down without being detected, using only the natural environment as our guide. It was a test of everything we had learned in training, and failure wasn't an option. We started at dawn, moving through the thick undergrowth with a practiced ease. The jungle was alive with sounds, chirps, rustles, the occasional growl of a predator. Our instructor had given us a basic location, but beyond that, it was up to us to find the target. We followed the trail with meticulous care, our eyes scanning for the smallest clues. A broken twig, a disturbed patch of ground, an irregular footprint. The real challenge began when we hit a false trail. Someone had tried to mislead us, leaving behind misleading clues and false tracks. It was a test within the test, and it required every bit of skill we had. We had to retrace our steps, analyze the patterns, and figure out what was genuine and what was deception. I remember crouching by a small stream, examining the muddy water where someone had tried to hide their tracks. The water had been disturbed in a way that didn't fit with the natural flow of the stream. I saw the faintest outline of a footprint on the bank, something that hadn't been there before. Using a combination of logic and intuition, I followed the true trail, ignoring the false leads. It wasn't just about physical tracking. It was about understanding the mindset of the person we were hunting, anticipating their moves, and adapting our strategy accordingly. We finally located our target, hidden in a small cave, just as the sun began to set. The success of that mission wasn't just a testament to our training, but to our ability to read the environment and outthink the opposition. The skills I developed in the military, detailed observation, critical thinking, and a keen sense of the natural world have been crucial in my work as a tracker. The precision required to navigate and interpret the subtle signs left by someone in the wilderness mirrors the skills I used in those high-stakes missions. When I'm out in the field, it's like a part of me is back in those jungles, analyzing every detail, every disturbance in the environment. In a way, my military background has shaped my approach to tracking. It's not just about following a set of clues. It's about understanding the bigger picture, piecing together a puzzle that often doesn't have obvious solutions. Each case is a new mission, with its own set of challenges and variables, and just like in the military, there's no room for error. Every detail matters, every sign is significant, and every decision counts. As I think back on those days, I realize how much they've influenced my work now. The training, the experiences, and even the tough lessons have all contributed to making me the tracker I am today. It's a skill set forged in the crucible of high-stress situations, one that I rely on every time I step into the woods to find someone who's gone missing. And while I might not be in uniform anymore, the lessons learned in the field continue to guide me, helping me navigate the complexities of the wilderness and the mysteries it holds. I've been doing this job for years, and it's earned me a reputation in town. People know that if their loved one is lost out in the woods, Jake's their best bet. Maybe that's why I've never been good at anything else. The wilderness makes sense to me in a way the rest of the world doesn't. People are complicated. The forest is straightforward. It's a place where I can use my skills without dealing with the mess of human life. I'm not the kind of guy who spends a lot of time socializing. My usual routine after a long day of tracking is to head to a local bar on the edge of town, have a drink or two, then head back to my cabin to sleep. The bar's a small, quiet place with a handful of regulars who know how to keep to themselves. That night was no different, or so I thought. I was nursing a beer, trying to wind down, when I heard raised voices near the entrance. I turned my head slightly to see a middle-aged couple talking to the bartender. They looked out of place, city folk, by the looks of their clothes and the desperation in their voices. The woman's eyes were red from crying, and the man's voice had a pleading edge to it. "Please, our daughter's gone missing," the man was saying. "She was hiking in the forest near the old logging road. Has anyone seen her? We need help." I kept my eyes on my drink, but my ears perked up. I knew the area they were talking about. It was remote, hard to navigate, and not a place for inexperienced hikers. People got lost out there all the time, but they usually showed up after a day or two, scratched up but alive. The fact that this couple was here, in this bar, asking for help, meant they were running out of options. I finished my beer and stood up, making my way over to them. "I couldn't help but overhear," I said, keeping my voice calm. "I'm Jake. I've been working as a tracker around these parts for a long time. Maybe I can help find your daughter." The couple turned to me, and the relief on their faces was palpable. They introduced themselves as Tom and Karen. Their daughter, Emily, had come out to the mountains to hike a few days ago, and they hadn't heard from her since. She was supposed to check in with them, but her phone was going straight to voicemail. They'd contacted the authorities, but the search hadn't turned up anything so far. "Do you have a picture of her?" I asked. Karen fumbled through her purse and pulled out a photo, handing it to me. Emily was in her mid-20s, with dark hair pulled back in a ponytail. She was smiling at the camera, standing on what looked like a hiking trail. I studied the picture for a moment, then handed it back. "Where was she last seen?" Tom pulled out a map and unfolded it on the bar. He pointed to a spot near the old logging road, about 10 miles from town. "Here." She told us she was planning to start from this point and follow the trail up into the mountains. I nodded. I knew the area well. Dense forest, rocky terrain, and not many paths to follow. It would be easy for someone to get lost out there, especially if they weren't familiar with the land. "I'll start first thing in the morning," I said. "I'll need a description of what she was wearing and any other details you can give me." They provided everything I needed, a list of what Emily was carrying, her planned route, and even the brand of hiking boots she wore. I listened carefully, making mental notes. The couple offered me money, but I waved them off. This wasn't about cash. I had a bad feeling about this, a gut instinct telling me that time was running out. If Emily was out there, I needed to find her, and fast. I left the bar that night with a sense of urgency I hadn't felt in a long time. I packed my gear as soon as I got home, making sure I had everything I'd need: maps, a compass, a flashlight, a knife, and enough food and water to last a couple of days. I knew the terrain would be challenging, and I didn't want to waste any time coming back for supplies. By the time I went to bed, I had a clear plan in mind. I'd head out at first light, start from the trailhead where Emily was last seen, and work my way up the mountains. I'd check the main paths first, then move on to the less traveled areas. If Emily was lost, she'd likely try to follow the trails to find her way back. But if she'd been injured or had gone off trail, it would be a different story. As I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, I knew that this search would be different from the others. I'd found plenty of lost hikers before, but something about this case felt off. I couldn't put my finger on it, but I knew I had to be prepared for anything. I just hoped that whatever I found out there, I'd be able to handle it. I set out at dawn, the morning light just starting to filter through the trees. I drove my truck to the trailhead where Emily had last been seen, parked, and got my gear together. The forest was quiet. The only sounds the rustling of leaves and the distant call of a bird. I stood there for a moment, taking in the scene, letting my instincts guide me. I started on the main trail, moving slowly and carefully. My eyes scanned the ground for any signs, footprints, broken branches, anything that might tell me where Emily had gone. After about an hour of searching, I found a torn piece of fabric caught on a branch, a few yards off the trail. It matched the color of the jacket Emily was wearing in the photo. I made a note of the location and kept going. A little further on, near a small stream, I found a water bottle half buried in the mud. I picked it up, turning it over in my hands. It was a common brand, the kind you'd find in any convenience store. I checked the area for more clues and noticed some scuff marks on the rocks near the stream. It looked like someone had slipped or stumbled here. Maybe Emily had tried to cross the stream and lost her balance. I crossed the stream myself, moving carefully. On the other side, I found more signs of passage, more scuff marks, a broken branch. Someone had come this way, but the trail was getting harder to follow. The forest was denser here, the underbrush thicker. I pushed forward, keeping my senses sharp. That's when I found the tracks. They were faint at first, just impressions in the soft ground, but as I moved further, they became clearer. Large, clawed footprints, unlike anything I'd seen before. I knelt down to get a better look. The prints were deep, suggesting whatever made them was heavy, and they had a stride longer than a man's. I took out my phone and snapped a few pictures, knowing I'd need to study them later. I couldn't identify the tracks right away. They didn't match any animal native to these parts. Bears and wolves were common, but these tracks were different. The size, the shape, the claws, it was all wrong. I felt a knot form in my stomach, but I pushed the unease aside. I had a job to do. I continued following the tracks, letting them guide me deeper into the forest. The terrain was getting rougher, with steep slopes and rocky outcrops. The air was cooler, the light dimmer as the canopy thickened overhead. The tracks led me off the trail entirely, into areas few hikers ventured. I knew I was getting into dangerous territory, but I couldn't turn back now, not with Emily still missing. After another hour or so, I came to a small clearing. The ground was littered with animal bones, and there were markings on the trees, long scratches that looked like they'd been made by claws. The tracks continued into the clearing, but I didn't follow them right away. I stood at the edge, scanning the area, trying to piece together what had happened here. The bones looked fresh. Some still had bits of fur and flesh clinging to them. Whatever had been feeding here, it hadn't been gone long. I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up, a primal warning that I wasn't alone. I slowly circled the clearing, keeping my eyes and ears open. Then I saw it, another piece of clothing, partially hidden under a bush. I moved closer and realized it was a shoe, a woman's hiking boot, half buried in the dirt. My heart pounded in my chest. I was on the right track, but the evidence I was finding painted a grim picture. Emily had been here, but so had something else, something big and dangerous. I picked up the shoe and examined it. There were scratches on the leather, like it had been clawed. I placed it back on the ground and took a few steps back, trying to get a sense of the area. That's when I heard it. A low, rumbling sound, like a growl coming from somewhere in the trees. I turned, scanning the forest, but saw nothing. The growl came again, closer this time, vibrating through the ground. I felt a chill run down my spine, but I didn't move. I knew better than to run. Whatever was out there was watching me, and if I ran, I'd be prey. I stayed still for what felt like an eternity, listening, waiting. The growl didn't come again, and slowly, the forest seemed to settle. I took a deep breath and backed out of the clearing, keeping my eyes on the trees. When I was sure I was a safe distance away, I turned and headed back toward the trail, moving quickly but carefully. I needed to regroup, to think about my next move. Emily was still out here, and I was closer to finding her, but I wasn't alone. Something was hunting in these woods, and I had a feeling it wasn't finished yet. The more I followed the tracks, the more uneasy I became. The forest around me felt different. The usual sounds of wildlife were absent. No birds, no rustling of small animals in the underbrush. It was just me, the trees, and the growing sense of being watched. I kept moving, each step more cautious than the last. The tracks were leading me further away from the established paths, into a part of the forest that even I wasn't familiar with. The trees here were older, their trunks wide and gnarled, branches twisted together to form a thick canopy that blocked out the sky. The underbrush was dense, every inch of ground covered with ferns and thorny bushes that made progress slow and painful. As I walked, the tracks didn't meander the way animal tracks usually did. They had a purpose, a direction. Whatever had left them was moving with intent, and I was starting to suspect that intent involved me. I couldn't tell if it was a trap, or if I was simply closing in on something the creature wanted to protect. Either way, I had to keep going. Emily was out here somewhere, and I couldn't afford to turn back. I kept moving, each step more cautious than the last. The forest around me felt different, almost like it was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. The usual sounds of wildlife were absent. No birds, no rustling of small animals in the underbrush. It was just me, the trees, and the growing sense of being watched. I climbed over a fallen log, the bark rough under my hands, and paused. There was a noise ahead, a faint, rhythmic thumping, like something hitting the ground over and over. I crouched low and moved toward the sound, careful to keep my movements quiet. As I drew closer, the thumping grew louder, and I realized it wasn't just one sound, but many, layered on top of each other. My heart raced as I recognized what it was. The sound of multiple creatures moving, their footfalls synchronized as they circled an area up ahead. I crept closer, pushing aside a curtain of leaves, and saw another clearing. This one was larger, with a boulder at its center. The ground was churned up, dirt and leaves scattered everywhere, and around the edges of the clearing, several figures moved. They were hunched over, their bodies covered in matted fur, faces hidden in the shadows. Their limbs were long and thin, ending in hands with too many fingers, each tipped with a claw. I frowncy, my breath catching in my throat. The creatures were pacing around the boulder, growling softly, and I realized that they were communicating with each other. They were too coordinated, too intelligent for any animal I'd ever encountered. I watched as one of them raised its head and sniffed the air, its eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. I ducked lower, praying it wouldn't see me. I stayed there for what felt like hours, watching the creatures circle the clearing. They moved with an eerie grace, their movements almost hypnotic. I could hear them growling to each other, a low, guttural sound that sent a chill down my spine. I strained to hear more, trying to pick up any words or patterns, but it was all gibberish to me. Finally, one of the creatures broke away from the group and approached the boulder. It reached out with one of its clawed hands and touched the stone, tracing patterns on its surface. The others stopped pacing and watched, their eyes fixed on the creature at the boulder. The air seemed to thrum with energy, and I felt a pressure in my ears, like I was standing too close to a speaker blasting a low-frequency sound. My head began to pound, a dull ache that grew sharper with each passing second. Then I saw it, a flash of color near the base of the boulder. It was a piece of fabric, caught on the rough stone, the same color as Emily's jacket. My mind raced. Was she here? Had these creatures taken her? I scanned the clearing, looking for any sign of her, but saw nothing but the creatures, the boulder, and the oppressive silence. I had to get closer, but there was no way to do it without being seen. I weighed my options, my mind racing. I could try to draw them away, make a noise, and lead them on a chase. But if I did that, I'd be leading them further into the forest, away from Emily. I couldn't risk losing whatever chance I had of finding her. I inched back, careful not to make any noise, and retreated into the forest. My only option was to circle around, approach the clearing from another angle, and hope I could get a better look without drawing their attention. I moved slowly, keeping to the shadows, my eyes constantly scanning the ground for any sign of the creatures. It took me nearly half an hour to find a spot where I could see the clearing from a different angle. When I did, my breath caught in my throat. There, near the base of the boulder, was Emily. She was lying on the ground, her body lifeless, arms sprawled awkwardly. Her clothes were torn, and her face was pale, eyes staring vacantly up at the sky. I knew immediately she was dead. Her skin had a bluish tint, like she had been out here for days. The creatures were gathered around her now, growling softly as they sniffed her body. One of them lifted her arm, its claws grazing her skin, and I saw the marks, deep scratches, bite marks. They had killed her, and now they were toying with her remains, examining her as if deciding what to do next. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me, bile rising in my throat. I had found Emily, but there was no one left to save. The reality of it hit me like a punch to the gut. I had come all this way, risked my life, and she was already gone. Suddenly, one of the creatures lifted its head and sniffed the air, its eyes narrowing. I ducked lower, but it was too late. The creature let out a loud, guttural sound, a call to the others. In a blur of movement, they all turned in my direction, their eyes glowing. I knew I had to leave before they found me. I turned and bolted through the forest, branches scratching at my face, underbrush tearing at my clothes. Behind me, I heard the creatures crashing through the trees, their growls growing louder. They were fast, too fast. I knew they would catch me if I didn't think of something. I veered off the path, diving behind a large fallen tree. I pressed myself against the ground, listening as the creatures came closer. They stopped nearby, sniffing the air, growling to each other in those guttural sounds that sent a chill down my spine. I held my breath, praying they wouldn't find me. For a few tense moments, they were right on top of me. I could hear them moving around, the sound of their claws scraping against the bark of the trees. One of them let out a low snarl, and I felt the ground vibrate beneath me. I closed my eyes, willing myself to be invisible, to be nothing more than another part of the forest. Then, just as suddenly as they had appeared, they were gone. I listened as their growls faded into the distance, the sound of their footsteps growing softer. I waited a few minutes, making sure they weren't coming back, before I dared to move. When I was sure the coast was clear, I crawled out from my hiding spot, my heart still pounding in my chest. I knew I had to get out of there, had to get back to the trailhead and warn the others. Emily was gone, but there were other hikers, other people who could stumble into these creatures' path. I had to make sure no one else met the same fate. I moved quickly, retracing my steps back to the trailhead. Every sound made me jump, my senses on high alert. I kept expecting the creatures to appear out of the trees, but the forest was quiet again, almost peaceful. It was as if the whole place had been holding its breath, waiting for the moment to strike, and now it was over. When I reached the trailhead, I saw Tom and Karen waiting by their car, their faces lighting up when they saw me. As I approached, they hurried over, desperation in their eyes. "Did you find her?" Karen asked, her voice trembling. There was a fragile hope in her eyes, a hope I was about to crush. I hesitated, feeling the weight of what I was about to say. "I found her," I said softly, "but she's gone. I'm so sorry. Emily's dead." The words felt hollow, unreal, even as I said them. For a moment, there was silence. Then Karen let out a wail, a raw, agonizing sound that echoed through the trees. She collapsed to her knees, clutching at her hair, sobs racking her body. Tom fell beside her, his face crumpling as he pulled her into his arms. I watched, feeling helpless, knowing that nothing I could say would ever make this better. Tom looked up at me, his eyes red and swollen. "How?" he choked out. "How did she die?" "There's something in the forest," I said. "Some kind of creatures. They killed her. I saw them. They're not like anything I've ever seen. We have to leave, get help, warn people. No one is safe here." Karen's sobs turned to screams, each one more desperate than the last. No, it can't be true," she cried. "My baby, my Emily, she can't be gone." Her voice broke, and she buried her face in Tom's chest, her body shaking with the force of her grief. Tom held her tightly, his own tears falling silently. He looked at me, and in his eyes, I saw not just sorrow, but anger, a deep, burning rage that I knew was directed at me. "You promised to find her," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You promised to bring her back." "I'm sorry," I whispered. "I tried. I did everything I could. But those things, they're dangerous. We have to leave. We need to get help." Tom shook his head, his face twisting with grief. You said you'd bring her back. You said you'd find her. You promised. I know, I said, and I failed. But we have to go now. If we stay here, we're all in danger. Tom's expression hardened, and for a moment, I thought he might hit me. But then he turned away, his shoulders slumping as he pulled Karen closer. Just get us out of here, he said quietly. Get us away from this place. We made the call to the sheriff, and within an hour, a small group of armed men arrived at the trailhead. I showed them the pictures on my phone, described what I'd seen, and led them back into the forest. Every step felt like it took an eternity, the tension mounting with each passing second. When we reached the clearing, the creatures were gone. Emily's body lay still at the base of the boulder, untouched since I had last seen her. The sight of her, so small and still, tore at my heart. The sheriff's men spread out, searching the area, but there was no sign of the creatures. It was as if they had vanished, leaving no trace behind. Tom and Karen stood over Emily's body, their faces pale. Karen knelt beside her, gently brushing the hair from Emily's face, her tears falling onto her daughter's cold skin. My baby, she whispered, her voice cracking. I'm so sorry, Emily. I'm so sorry I couldn't protect you. Tom placed a hand on her shoulder, his own eyes filled with tears. We'll find who did this, he said. We'll find them, and they'll pay. I swear it. I stood back, watching as the sheriff and his men began to gather evidence, taking photos, marking the area. The scene felt surreal, like something out of a nightmare. I had done what I came to do. I had found Emily, but the cost was far higher than I could have imagined. As we walked back to the trailhead, I glanced back at the forest. I could feel the weight of it pressing down on me, the knowledge that something was still out there, watching, waiting. Emily was dead, but the danger wasn't over. The creatures had let us go this time, but I had no doubt they were still out there, hidden in the shadows, waiting for their next victim. Tom and Karen were inconsolable, their grief a palpable thing that filled the air around us. I knew that they would never be the same, that the loss of their daughter would haunt them for the rest of their lives. And as much as I wanted to believe that I had done everything I could, a part of me knew that I had failed them. I had failed Emily, and that knowledge would haunt me forever. Thank you for venturing into the darkness with us. If you dare to explore further, be sure to subscribe to our channel for more spine-tingling tales of horror and the supernatural. Remember, the shadows hold endless mysteries, waiting to be unveiled. Stay tuned for more bone-chilling stories as we continue to traverse the eerie depths of the unknown together. Until next time, may your dreams be free from the haunting echoes of our tales. Or perhaps not.